I'm Sarah Jackson, host of Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, a listening experience choreographed to help you elevate your internal communications to the pro level.
With internal communications, it seems like that that people tend to go to tactics first. You're becoming not only the communication support, but a business partner, if you will. But at the end of the day, it's better, I think, to add value as a strategic advisor, as a trusted advisor to a stakeholder, rather than simply be an order taker. This is our time for internal communications. We showed everybody what we could do in a crisis in 2020. Now, we want to show people what we can do outside of a crisis in the regular course of business. And if we do some of these things, I think we're really able to prove ourselves and advance our function even further.
That's Gary Ross, president of Inside Comms, an internal communications coaching, consulting, and training firm. Now, we are already through Q1 of this year and headed well into Q2. And some of us might be slipping back into our old worlds of taking orders, becoming distracted, and really struggling to focus on what truly matters to our business. Well, today, Gary helps us rewire ourselves with a new strategic mindset that will provide guardrails for your work and empower you with a new strategic mindset that repositions you from order taker to that much needed strategic coach that your business needs. Get ready to be transformed, stay focused, build credibility, and show value all along the way.
I'm Gary Ross. I am the president of Inside Comms, and we are an internal communications training, coaching, and consulting firm.
Well, Gary, I cannot wait to talk to you today. I know we got connected a little while back, and when I uncovered that you could help our audience with some issues that they came to us with, our listeners were really wanting some insights on how to do their strategic planning, particularly heading into this next marathon of 2021. And so today I know we're going to be talking about aligning our strategies and tactics, mapping them to business objectives so we can avoid mission creep. So I know we got a lot to talk about, but before we jump in to dive into it, would you give us a little bit of your backstory and how did you get into this amazing world of internal comms?
Sure. Out of college, I was a journalist first. So I'm a former television and radio journalist. I was nominated for an Emmy for some TV work that I did back in the day. And after being a journalist, I got into PR and media relations. And as I advanced in my career and got some more responsibility in the communications world, I got exposed to internal communications and really started to develop a passion around it because I love the opportunity to simultaneously help organizations and their individual people as well. And so as my career moved forward, I gravitated more and more toward internal communications. And now my consultancy is firmly and exclusively focused on internal communications. I had previously led communications departments for three large companies: Hyatt Hotels Corporation, CDW, and Fortune Brands Home and Security. And I've been consulting now for about 6 or 7 years and really love it.
Well, I love having an expert like you on our show. Tell us about your journey last year. Our listeners love hearing and comparing other consultants listening to their to stories of everyone because we all have a unique story about that moment in history. Tell us about 2021, COVID-19, the turbulent year. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so I was at the beginning of 2020. I was consulting for a company. I was their acting head of internal communications, and I remember their risk management guy saying, "I think I'm going to start a task force about this coronavirus thing," and a bunch of us were saying, "It's no big deal." And well, sure enough, it turned out to be something absolutely incredible and different than any of us had ever expected, and we started working very, very closely together with risk management and and HR and legal and all these organizations to make sure that we were simultaneously planning for the business and also giving people the information that they needed to get through these early days when we were trying to figure out everything that was going on. So that got eventually got off to a good start, and we were able to, I think, make a difference for people as we were all trying to figure out how everything was going to be happening. The assignment with that organization ended, and at the same time, the pandemic was really starting to deepen, I guess, and so started to look for new ways to engage with people virtually and online. And I had some plans for some doing some in-person internal communications training in 2020, and had to pivot that into an online e-learning experience. And so now I have a suite of e-learning courses specifically for internal communication that I offer to people online at plus.insidecoms.com. I call it Inside Comms Plus. And then I also had done some other training with a business skills and leadership development firm, and that was an in-person model. We had to pivot all of that to online. So I fired up the computer and ordered a bunch of stuff to create an at-home studio. So I have lights and a green screen and a teleprompter, and I do my own production here for training, both for internal communication and also broader leadership and business skills as well. And so have really gotten into that and have enjoyed that. Also, still doing some consulting on a remote basis as well. But it's just been adapting to the online model that has been interesting, and also frustrating at times too, because a lot of the old standbys in terms of networking and seeing people aren't happening anymore. You can't go have lunch with somebody or go to a happy hour anymore. You've got to find ways to network online and to deliver your consulting and your coaching and your training online. So it's been fun looking for creative ways to do that, but it's also been really a challenge to learn all of that kind of on the fly. I was lucky to be able to rely a little bit on my past TV and radio experience for the video and production pieces of it. So it's been fun to kind of tap that as well. So it's been a year kind of reinvention, but I really like the creativity behind it too.
Well, and what a great model for all of us, for entrepreneurs, for internal communicators, for people doing side hustle projects, that COVID really did have, forced that ingenuity to kind of reimagine and rethink things, and for you to lean into your strengths and now have a wonderful product. We'll be sure to link all of that in our show notes so that people can know how to access that. So, today we're going to be talking about strategic planning. Get us started here. What problem do you see with internal communicators when it comes to developing their internal communication strategic plan?
Yeah, with internal communications, it seems like that people tend to go to tactics first, and I don't think it's so much internal communications, but more so our stakeholders that we work with in organizations. We've all gotten that knock on the door, or these days that email or video call that says, "Hey, I need a campaign. I need an internal communications campaign on this thing that we're doing." And or I need an email, or I need a presentation, or something along those lines. People tend to think about tactics first. And what I like to do is take a step back and say, okay, well, let's learn about the program. Let's learn about what you're trying to accomplish. And then we can figure out the best ways that internal communication can help you. It may be an email, it might not be an email, it may be a nice presentation, or it might not be a presentation or a campaign. Let's take a closer look at what it is you're looking to accomplish. And you accomplish two things that way. Number one is, I think you tend to make the internal communications a lot more strategic and a lot more meaningful, and you'll have a better chance of making the underlying project more successful. But you also sometimes wind up, and this is kind of neat, you wind up having the folks whose project it is kind of think more about what it is that they're actually trying to do. And you can help them discover perhaps some questions that they haven't answered for themselves, or some pitfalls that they might not have considered along the way. So in that way, you're becoming not only the communication support, but a business partner, if you will, in helping your colleagues and helping your stakeholders advance their project in a certain way. So that tends to be a really cool byproduct of that as well, and that tends to then get you some more credibility and get you invited to meetings and get you recommended to other people in the organization. So it can have a lot of benefits thinking more strategically that way than rather than being just kind of an order taker. When somebody knocks on the door and says, "Hey, I need an email or a video," you say, "Sure, I'll do it. When do you need it by?"
I know, and God love us. We're wired that way, though. That is our default. I mean, that is such a good tip to sort of pause and rewire a bit to see ourselves as that coach. I love what you said about helping them think more about their own problem, because now you got two problems. Maybe they just are, they're trying to get their work done, and then we're trying to get our work done, and you put those two together, and no one's going to come up with the best product. What That is such a good tip. I love this.
Well, I remember specifically somebody came to me about a year ago with something that this new concept that they wanted to launch, and they said we need a communications campaign around this. And so we start asking questions. Okay, so well, what is it? Um, and then you get sort of like a vague description, and then well, okay, so what do you want people to do as a result of this new concept? And they don't really know, but now because you've asked them to do that, because you need to know that for your communications, right? If you're putting communications out that you want to drive a certain behavior, you need to know what those behaviors are. But then you've just uncovered that the people whose project it is haven't really thought that through yet. So you become again a partner in helping them shape what it is they're doing, and then you can better figure out how internal communication can strategically support their goal.
I love it. So, talk to me about, because we are in the weeds. So, help me get out of the weeds, because I'm thinking about my content strategy. I'm thinking about all these things that I have to finish and tackle and get done, along with COVID, and that's not over, and it's so hard to get above that. I don't even know where to begin. So, can you talk about your process or a framework to get us organized so that we can rewire ourselves, but yet also do the work that we need to get done?
Yeah, there's a process that you can go through and think through that also eventually becomes the individual pieces of your plan. So you're doing the thinking, but you're also creating a plan at the same time. And where I like to start is the business objectives. What somebody is coming to you, or you're noticing an opportunity in your organization where strategic communications can help. The first question to ask is, what is the business looking to accomplish through this program, through the campaign, this plan, whatever it is that you're going to be supporting? Is it increased sales? Is it increased engagement? Is it less turnover? Is it improved efficiency in a manufacturing facility, and so on? Determine what those business objectives are. And again, maybe people don't have them. So now you've become a partner in saying, okay, let's figure out what these business objectives are. And then at the end of the day, you align and say, okay, here's the top maybe one, two, or three things that for the business you want this initiative, whatever it is, to accomplish for the business. And then so now you've got these business objectives that you've aligned on, you've agreed on with your stakeholder. Then the next stage is you move to communications objectives. Okay, so what do we want our communications to accomplish in such a way that it'll help fuel the business goals? So again, let's say we're talking about decreased turnover. We want our communication objectives to start. Would be an example would be like we're going to build better engagement in a manufacturing facility so we have less turnover. So that's what the job that we want our communications to do, is to build more engagement, and that will then feed back into our business objective, which is again to reduce turnover. So we've got, okay, now our business objective and our communication objective, which again we align and agree on with our stakeholders. So there's a little give and take there. And what that does is that helps provide guardrails now for the rest of your plan and for the rest of your initiative and your activities. So you're saying you'll be able to say to yourself and to your stakeholder too, the things that we want to do, the things that we're going to be working on in our internal communications, are they focusing, are they helping rather, and feeding into our communication objectives, which are ultimately feeding into our business objectives? If they are, great, let's do them. If they're not, let's set them aside. Maybe that'll be helpful for something else, and get back to something that's going to focus on our communications objectives. So by aligning on objectives up front, we're providing our guardrails, and then we're also agreeing with our stakeholders. This is what we've decided to focus on.
Yeah, that is so good to get that clarity up front. And then do you find that the people that you consult often have to remind people that this is what the objective is, because they are typically a person that was a yes person, so that they have to keep reminding and coaching folks, hey, this might fall out. This email you want me to send is not aligned with this. Coach us on how to do that. Is that something we're going to have to remind our team about?
Yeah, that's it. It can be a little tough, but that's where we add our value. Think about that. That's where we add our value and we build our credibility. Because if you're finding yourself in a position of coaching your stakeholder, or perhaps somebody more senior to you, that hey, we understand why you want to say this, but this certain thing might be better said somewhere else, because in this particular piece of communication, we've decided that we've already agreed, you and me, that this is going to be focusing on the communication objective in our particular initiative. And that, perhaps might be better suited someplace else. So now you've become, instead of being an order taker or somebody who's a really good writer and can make something sing, as we've all been asked to do, we're now a coach. We're now an advisor, a trusted advisor. And when you've got a good leader that you're coaching there, they're seeing within you that you're providing a lot more than a valuable service of being a good writer, but you're also adding some perspective and some thought to it. And the good leaders want that. Good leaders want a little bit of pushback. Good leaders want to be coached, because at the end of the day, that's going to make it most successful. And that's one of the things that you can use, by the way, as you're coaching these folks. You're saying, look, as a communicator, I think if we do it this particular way, we're going to increase the chances of success of this initiative, this program, and so forth. And so that's one way you can get people to go along with you. Now, this is easier said than done. I totally get it. And I've been in situations where I feel like I want to say certain things, and sometimes only half of it comes out, or it's a little tough to say it. And I totally get that. But at the end of the day, it's better, I think, to add value as a strategic advisor, as a trusted advisor to a stakeholder, rather than simply be an order taker. Because if you're an order taker and you know something, and you deliver an email, but it's not going to work, when it eventually doesn't work or support that initiative, guess who they're going to be looking at when they say, oh, hey, our communications didn't work? They're going to be looking at you, right? So it's it can be to your benefit to speak up. Now, my own personal tolerance for being able to do this, and everybody's got to decide what they're most comfortable with, is I didn't mind every now and then getting slapped down, or figuratively, or told no about something, or getting a little signal from somebody that maybe I pushed a little too far on this. You've got to be alert and understand when that happens, and back off. But again, the good leaders will not mind that. You may be making a suggestion, and somebody says that you really believe it, and somebody says, nope, we just really got to do it this way. And then you push back and say, well, because XYZ, I think we should do it this way. And then your stakeholder says, well, no, we've got to do it this way. And you get a sense that, okay, I've gotten to that limit where I can't push anymore. That's fine. You've done the best you can, and you move on. and everybody's got to decide where their comfort level is there. But that is the way I think ultimately we build credibility, we add value.
That's so good. So before I go down this road, talk to me because this is about showing value. So I want to get into kind of ROI here. I want to get into, is there any particular metrics or baseline data that I need to capture that sits on top of this strategic plan so that I can show the success and learn myself of what's working? What do you suggest on that front?
It depends on the business objective. So I'll give you an example. Back when I led corporate communications for a publicly traded company, being a publicly traded company was a big deal for the employees there. Everybody had stock options, so it was a big deal. Well, the company was about to be taken private by private equity and sold, and we were going to become a private company, and there wouldn't be stock options anymore. People would get paid for what they had, but this was going to be a drastic change for the company. And so we had to do a communications program to help the organization through that. And we said our goal is going to be, our business objective was going to be to maintain the productivity throughout this the news that really was going to rock everybody's world, and that our communication objectives were going to be to make people or have people understand as much as possible what is happening so that they can then turn and go back to their jobs and ultimately maintain productivity. So we developed a plan around that. We executed the plan, and within 48 hours of this huge announcement that rocked everybody's world, the company had its fourth largest sales day to date at that point in the history of the company. And the CEO of the company credited our communications plan with helping to maintain that productivity through this very distracting and anxiety-ridden time for these employees. So in that particular case, we started at the beginning and said, okay, well, how are we going to prove our ROI, our return on investment on this? That if our sales continue to do well during this time of distraction and anxiety for employees, then the communication plan will have worked, and it did. So that's an example of where a business aligning on a business objective up front, and your ROI metrics are going to tie basically to those business objectives. So if you go back to the other example I had about turnover, you can say, okay, our metric is going to be we're going to reduce turnover by 10% in this manufacturing facility. We do our communications program, and at the end of it, has turnover gone down? It's a yes or no question. Has it gone down by that amount? And that helps us decide whether or not it's successful.
The Internal Comms Pro Collective is proudly supported by Circle Broadcast. You know, jumping back and forth between the handfuls of platforms you manage to fix a single misplaced comma is pretty frustrating. What if you could create, edit, and distribute all of your internal content from one centralized platform? Well, with Circle Broadcast, you can simplify and innovate your IC tech stack with their cross-channel comms approach. With one click, publish and send your content to your employee email, SharePoint, Teams, and mobile app. Now your employees can consume it on the channel of their choice. Head on over to circle.com/ICP to learn more about their unique internal comms solution. That's CERKL.com/ICP. Now, Gary has got us running in the right direction on rewiring a more strategic mindset. Now, in this next part, I dive a little bit deeper into ROI, when and how it's communicated. And if you struggle with that order taker syndrome, Gary gives us practical tips on how to sift through and handle all those requests. Now let's jump back in. So, is everything going to be tied to an ROI in my strategic plan? Or should everything have an ROI?
Everything should have an objective, and a communications objective that's tied to a business objective. And that business objective will have that ROI metric to it. So if you really want to build it out further, if we go back to our turnover example and say, all right, I want to reduce turnover by 10%, and that's going to save $25,000 over the next 12 months. Let's say, we'd have to partner with HR to figure out what that would be. And then we know, okay, if we spend $10,000 on our communication campaign and we've reduced turnover by 10% and we've saved $25,000 by doing that, that's a net of $15,000. So there's our ROI. So I would tie it to that business objective that we align on up front. And again, if we align on it up front, nobody could argue with you later on and say, well, yes or no, or because you've agreed up front that this is what's going to determine whether or not you've made the difference.
Yeah. Any coaching on when you do unearth the ROI of your work? How do I communicate that and not sound self-serving? I mean, any tips on giving us a little polish here so that we can remind leadership of the value that we are providing if it might not be evident.
So you're ruling out running down the hallway waving pieces of paper that show that the
We're awesome.
we're awesome. Tape it to your office door. No, I think that you can tie back, if especially if you've got if you're talking about it as a set initiative. When it's done, you can tie back with your stakeholder and say, hey, we said we were going to set out to reduce turnover by 10%, and here it is, it's down 11%. And if you go on the math that HR, with the numbers that HR set out, we've saved 15,000, or we saved 25,000, it only cost us 10,000. High five to all of us. That's great. If it's more like on an annual basis, or a program on an annual basis, save that ROI, those success metrics, for your next planning session. So when you're going back for the next annual plan, when you do your situation analysis, you could say, hey, we did this, this, and this. Our ROI is this. We'd like to continue that. And that's kind of hard to argue against if, you're saying, hey, we did this before and it worked.
But it's fair to say to know ROI feels like a bunch. I'm picturing it like a bunch of gems, like knowing when to play those cards, or maybe it's more of a Kenny Rogers song, like know when to hold them, when to fold them, when you're gonna walk, and then absolutely run down the hall, right? But that's what I feel like I'm hearing you say, of knowing when to play those cards. It's even strategically to remind again leadership of, hey, we did this, or even to make a business case, for more resources you may need down the road.
Yeah, so let's say you successfully do that program, you've reduced the turnover, and then somebody else from another part of the organization comes to you and says, "Hey, I need a video series on this new thing that we're doing." And then you put on your strategic hat and say, "Okay, is a video series really the way to go? Tell me what it is you're looking to accomplish." And they tell you what they're looking to accomplish, but they're just being patronizing, and they're saying, "But I just want my video, okay?" And you could say to them, all right, we can do your video, but when we worked with so and so over in the over at that manufacturing facility, and they asked us to reduce turnover by 10%, we reduced it by 12% and saved them $15,000. They were pretty happy with our approach. So we can go ahead and use the same approach that we know worked over there in this facility, or we could try something else. So, I mean, you got to find the best diplomatic way of saying that. Again, easier said than done. It all depends on your relationships with your people, with your stakeholders, how long you've been in the organization, sort of the maturity, quote unquote, of the communications function in the organization. There's a ton of variables that go into that. So I'm not saying just go in and start throwing numbers around. But there's a way to consider that notion and then filter it through your own situation to communicate to the stakeholder and say, well, we did it this way and it worked over there, and they can tell you how successful it was, and they enjoyed it and it worked, and we'd really like to take the same approach with you. So yeah, that's one way to do it.
So, well, as we get started, give us some warnings, maybe some mistakes that you've seen made, learnings that you've seen other internal communicators, glean from. What's one thing that you believe internal communicators, are missing when approaching this kind of strategic planning work?
it's kind of that default back into that tactical mindset, because we're all creative folks and we love to just kind of get out there and do things, and we've seen things that have worked in the past, and or we saw something at a conference or on social media where somebody did a 1 minute video, and boy, I want to do that 1 minute video at our company. Well, it may have been a terrific thing for that particular circumstance, that other person's particular circumstance, but not for you. So it's just developing that discipline to go back into that strategic mindset. The other thing, and this is sort of the next step in the planning process after you come up with those business objectives and communications objectives, is to really start thinking about your audience and doing an audience analysis and going into whatever construct it is that you like to use. I like to use the classic think, feel, do. What do we want people to think and feel and eventually do as a result of our communication activities? And a lot of it, some of that you can do if you know your audience well. You could just do it by yourself or brainstorm with other folks, or sometimes it takes going out and interviewing people and coming up with that yourself. But that gives you a real sense of what your audience is going to respond to and how you're going to need to communicate to them to get them to ultimately do what your communication then sets out for, or is setting out to do. And then once you have that, you can then, the next step would be to develop the messaging and the narrative and so forth, and then eventually the strategies and ultimately the tactics. But it's really getting into that understanding your audience. I like to say it's the number one rule of internal communication is know your audience, but my problem is I have about 7 number one rules. So
So if I get my plan and I'm all excited and it's 2021, based on 2020, plans got derailed. So if we're veering from our plan, what can we do to keep it on track? Talk to me about this.
well, that's the tricky piece, because plans need to be living documents, because life happens, whether or not it's a pandemic or things happen in industries. Business doesn't go as well as we expect, and sometimes budgets are cut, and we need to adapt along the way. So that's part of it. But the challenge is then to stay as true to those objectives that you've determined up front as possible. I don't want to say never go back and revise objectives, because that's just not practical. But those objectives should try to stay as sacred as possible as we move through. Hopefully we won't ever get jarred by anything as big as this pandemic again, but for as long as I've been doing this, plans have had to be living documents anyway, so we have to adjust along the way. And part of that actually comes from part of that actually is a function of our planning, because if you look at the very end of the planning process, we've got strategies, tactics. We ultimately want to measure what we're doing. We're going to get learnings of how our communication plan has worked. We should take those learnings and then feed that back into some of our strategies and tactics and make adjustments along the way. So if our program is long enough and we're able to have that feedback loop.
That is so good. But to hear you teach about it and coach us fills in maybe some of the awkward moments and gives us a polish and teaches us about the nuances. We got the science of it, but hearing you talk about it feels like there's also an art to this because relationships are involved and it's not just a science step by step, X plus Y equals Z. There's gray areas. So I think it's so important to hear you teach about it. And you've mentioned you've got a series of trainings now. Again, we will put all of that in the show notes. Last question: if you could go back, to your younger self after doing this for some time, what warning or lesson would you give even younger folks or your younger self in working in this world of internal communications that's so rapidly changing and taking different twists with a pandemic and such a turbulent year, referring back to 2020?
I would tell myself to be even more courageous. And I phrase it that way because I think I'm courageous to some degree, but there are I think that's evolved over time, and I think as my younger self, if I were more courageous in doing some of that coaching, some of that pushback, I might have been able to make more of a difference early on. You mentioned it's a little bit of there's a process, but it's a little bit of an art too. We all have those moments, and I don't mean to sound cavalier about pushing back on people. I get it. It's tough. It's like you're walking out to the end of the diving board and your toes are dangling over the diving board there, and you're looking down into the pool and deciding, okay, how am I going to do this? We all have those moments, and we have to decide where our personal comfort level is, how high that diving board is going to be for each of us, right? And how we're going to make a difference that way. For me, myself, I wish that I would have counseled myself to be even more courageous early on, and that perhaps would have given me more success in the earlier stages of my career.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for spending, some time coaching us. It just feels different. I don't know why. When you say it, it's like, oh, you're right. We can be coaches. We can put on that strategic hat. I think we've had our heads down, just running so hard for so long. I think this conversation is just such a good reminder of kind of taking a deep breath. And before we put those running shoes on, maybe we need to get a clipboard and a hat and a whistle and say, we're also going to, play a coaching role this year as well. So I cannot thank you enough for giving us, just a pause and maybe rewiring that default a bit. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I mean, this is our time. This is our time for internal communications. We showed everybody what we could do in a crisis in 2020. Now, we want to show people what we can do outside of a crisis in the regular course of business. And if we do some of these things, I think we're really able to prove ourselves and advance our function even further. So it's great having this opportunity to speak with you today.
Well, and give us one more time. If people want to get in contact with you, where can we find you?
The website is www.insidecoms.com. And the e-learning, which is called Inside Comms Plus, is at plus.insidecoms.com. And my email address, reach out anytime, is Gary, Gary, .ross, ROSS, @insidecoms.com.
Well, thank you so much. We will also have all of that information in our show notes. Gary, stay connected with us. I'm sure we'll be reaching back out as we truck through this next new amazing year together.
My pleasure. This was fun. Thanks, Sarah.
Well, there you have it, folks. All the steps you need to take to begin rewiring yourself with a new strategic mindset. If you want to learn more, jump into one of Gary's e-learning courses. We'll make sure we'll have them all linked in today's show notes. Stay with us next week as our journey to uplevel your internal communications to the pro level continues.
Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, is produced by the Internal Comms Pro Collective and proudly supported by the Circle Broadcast Suite, an entire suite built for internal communicators. Learn more at circle.com. And don't forget to visit www.internalcommspro.com/show notes for our free resource guides. Thank you for listening.